I let you take a seat, grab a coffee. I saw the participant coming. And in just a couple of seconds, we will start the webinar. Okay. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining this live eFeed link webinar. In this webinar, we will have a look into the current raw material price increase. Furthermore, we have present today 3 experts that will shed their light on these questions. Are lysolecithins sustainable to face this problem of high price of raw material? Hello, my name is Antoine Berthaud. I will be your host for today. During regular office hours, I'm Adiceo's technical manager in Vietnam. Here's a short introduction of our other speakers. Christy De Wilt is Framelco product manager for lysolecithins. André Meussen is an independent consultant and nutritionist from Belgium. And Dr. Sivaram, veterinarian for 30 years in the livestock industry in Malaysia. Thank you all for joining us today, and as usual, keep the mic off and drop your question in the chat box. It's the talk of the day, and nowadays, farmers and livestock producers all over the world are facing a similar challenge, the rise of raw material price. Energy prices are skyrocketing too, and on top of that, transportation squeaks with shortage of containers, leading to higher costs of transport and even some delays. Because of the uncertainty, the wheat at Chicago hit a record last week, and the price of corn climbed to the highest in a decade. This price spikes in corn, soybean, and wheat are so tremendous that livestock producers and feed manufacturers now more than ever are looking for solutions to counter the material cost increase. Let's have a look at another costly factor in animal feed: fat and oil. Soybean, for instance. Similar to the other raw material, soybean oil prices have also risen dramatically over the last 2 years. What if we could make better use of this expensive fat in the feed formulation, or at least achieve the same results with lesser added fats or oils? To provide answer to these questions, Framelco developed its lysolecithin technology. The first part of today will be presented by Christy. She explains the theory behind lysolecithins and presents example of how lysolecithins perform in practice. Christy is product manager lysolecithins at Framelco. Next slide, please. She got a master's degree in animal nutrition at Wageningen University. She did some research work about the effect of glyceride and lysolecithin on animal health and performance. She is now lysolecithin specialist at Framelco since 2020. Christy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anton, and good day to everyone who's watching. So I'll be explaining the mode of action behind lysolecithins, but first I'm going to explain native lecithin in general. So native lecithin is a viscous and complex mixture which is mostly derived from soybean, sunflower or rapeseed oil by the water degumming of these oils. So native lecithin or crude lecithin in the animal feed industry is mostly used as a cheap source of energy and consists of phospholipids, glycolipids, carbohydrates, and some oil. So the blue part of phospholipids can be further broken down into the several types of phospholipids, of which PC and PE are the most abundant. So this is just to give you a sense of the typical composition of native lecithin. So for the remainder of my presentation, when I say lecithin or native lecithin, I actually refer to the phospholipids and not to the entire mixture of lecithin. And the same will apply to lysolecithins. When I say lysolecithins or hydrolyzed lecithin, I will be referring to the lysophospholipids and not the entire mixture. So to create lysolecithins, we have to hydrolyze native lecithin. So here on the left, you can see a phospholipid molecule, which consists of a head group and 2 fatty acetyls. This is combined then with the enzyme phospholipase A2, which is also an enzyme that naturally occurs in the digestive tract of animals. So under certain conditions of time, temperature, and pressure, this enzyme will cut off 1 fatty acetyl, resulting in the creation of lysolecithins and the release of a free fatty acid. So both native lecithin and lysolecithins are amphiphilic molecules, meaning that they have a water-loving site and a fat-loving site, of which the head groups are the water-loving or the hydrophilic sites, and the fatty acetyls are the fat-loving or the lipophilic sites. Because lysolecithins only have 1 fatty acetyl, they are relatively more hydrophilic than native lecithin having 2 fatty acetyls. And this difference in structure also causes a difference in their functionality. So because cost effectiveness and animal performance are important for our businesses, it is important that feed is utilized to its maximum potential. And therefore, we as Formelco offer lysolecithins as a solution to improve nutrient efficiency, bringing us one step closer to that goal. So the 2 main benefits of lysolecithins are that they improve nutrient digestibility by enhancing the emulsification and enzymatic potential. And secondly, they improve the nutrient absorption by enhancing the mixed micelle formation and the permeability. And altogether, with an improved nutrient digestibility and absorption, you will improve the nutrient efficiency. So for the first part of my presentation, I will focus on the nutrient digestibility. But first, I will explain basic fat digestion, as it is important to understand where lysolecithins have their effects. So basic fat digestion is a 3-step process which takes place in the small intestine, starting with the fat emulsification, during which large fat droplets are broken down into smaller droplets by the combined action of bile salts and lysolecithins, thereby forming an oil in water emulsion. The second step is fat hydrolysis, during which the enzyme lipase hydrolyzes the triglycerides into fatty acids and beta monoglycerides. And the smaller the droplets are from the first step of fat emulsification, the more surface area there is available for lipase to act on. Secondly, the fat hydrolysis products are hydrophobic and can therefore not travel easily through this aqueous environment of the small intestine, and therefore they are packed together into these hydrophilic mixed micelles. And lysolecithins help hereby by creating smaller and more stable mixed micelles. The last step is fat absorption, during which the smaller mixed micelles travel through this aqueous environment to the intestinal wall, where they release the products, after which they can be absorbed by the membrane. And here lysolecithins help by improving the permeability of the membrane and thereby improving nutrient absorption. So let us first focus on the emulsification. So as I said, native lecithin and lysolecithins are amphiphilic molecules, having a water-loving head and fat-loving tails. And because lysolecithins only have 1 fatty acetyl, they are relatively more hydrophilic than native lecithin having 2 fatty acetyls. So this difference in structure also causes a difference in the type of emulsion they create. And this can be indicated by the hydrophilic-lipophilic balance, or the HLB scale, as seen over here. So this scale indicates whether you are dealing with a water and oil emulsifier or an oil and water emulsifier, with lower values indicating a water and oil emulsifier and higher HLB values indicating an oil and water emulsifier. As fat digestion takes place in an aqueous environment, an oil and water emulsifier is required with an HLB value ideally ranging between 8 and 12. So if we first look then at native lecithin, which have an HLB value of around 4, which indicates that they are a water and oil emulsifier and also fall outside the ideal range of HLB value for in vivo fat digestion. So they are less suitable for this process. So when we look at lysolecithins have an HLB value of around 8 to 10. Thereby they promote an oil in water emulsion that is required for in vivo fat digestion and also fall within the ideal range for HLB values. And therefore lysolecithins will be more effective on improving the emulsification during in vivo fat digestion. So to just visualize the difference in emulsification between the two, we did a simple test. Here on the left, we added soybean oil to water, and you see that the oil and water do not mix. And therefore, we need to add an emulsifier. So in the middle, we added native lecithin, and then you see that the oil is not properly emulsified and forms this sticky and gummy formation. So then on the right, we added lysolecithins, and then you see that this finely dispersed oil in water emulsion is created with an equal distribution of emulsified fat droplets. So an improved emulsification can also be measured via the critical micelle concentration. And the critical micelle concentration, or CMC, is the concentration of a surfactant which is required to form micelles in an aqueous environment. Or in other words, it's just the minimum level of surfactant that you need to establish an effective emulsion. So we determined the CMC of lysolecithins, native lecithin, and a technical emulsifier, and we found that lysolecithins have a 1.9 times lower CMC than native lecithin and a 5.8 times lower CMC than the technical emulsifier. And the lower the CMC is, the less surfactant that is needed to establish an efficient emulsion formation. So this indicates that lysolecithins, that you need less of lysolecithins to establish an effective emulsion and efficient micelle formation. So the enzymatic potential of enzymes involved in fat digestion are dependent on the degree of emulsification. So if you improve emulsification with lysolecithins, you will also improve the enzymatic potential. And this has three reasons. First of all, lysolecithins are quite small molecules, and this means that they create smaller and therefore also more emulsified fat droplets, which raises the total surface area on which lipase can act. Secondly, enzymes are hydrophilic and need a hydrophilic environment to function properly. So you can imagine by creating this finely dispersed emulsion with these smaller emulsified fat droplets, you will also create a more hydrophilic environment for these enzymes to properly function in. And lastly, fat also forms a barrier for enzymes involved in protein and starch digestion. So again, by creating this finely dispersed emulsion, you will reduce this barrier furthermore and therefore give these enzymes also better access to their substrates, raising their enzymatic potential as well. So to demonstrate this raised enzymatic potential, I'll show you this trial where a mixture of palm oil and lipase was used, and then either native lecithin or lysolecithins were added, and then the fractions of triglycerides, monoglycerides, and free fatty acids was measured. So as you can see, with the addition of lysolecithins, the breakdown of triglycerides goes faster and also to a higher extent, also reflected by a higher and faster release of the monoglycerides and the free fatty acids. So in conclusion, by creating a more optimal environment for enzymes by lysolecithins, you will improve the efficiency of with what the triglycerides will be broken down. So now we are coming to the second part of my presentation, where we will discuss how lysolecithins will improve nutrient absorption by enhancing the mixed micelle formation and the permeability. So fat hydrolysis products are fatty substances and cannot travel easily through this aqueous environment of the small intestine. Therefore, they are packed together into these hydrophilic mixed micelles, which can travel easily through this aqueous environment and will transport these products to the intestinal wall, where they release the products, after which they can be absorbed. So mixed micelles are just tiny spherical structures containing surfactants like bile salts and lysolecithins and fat hydrolysis products like monoglycerides, cholesterol, and free fatty acids. So with the incorporation of lysolecithins into these mixed micelles, you create smaller mixed micelles, which are more stable and more hydrophilic. And therefore, you will improve the transport efficiency of these products to the intestinal wall and thereby their absorption. So next to improving the transport of the products, lysolecithins also improve the permeability, thereby affecting the structure of the membrane and improving nutrient absorption. So here on the left, you can see a membrane under normal conditions, which consists of a phospholipid bilayer, so 2 layers of phospholipids. And as you can see, there's little space between the individual phospholipids because phospholipids have 2 fatty acid tails. This increases the viscosity of the membrane and decreases the permeability of the membrane. When we incorporate lysolecithins into these membranes, more space is created as lysolecithins only have 1 fatty acid tail. Thereby you will decrease the viscosity of the membrane and increase the permeability of the membrane and thereby the nutrient absorption. But also lysolecithins are conically shaped as compared to the cylindrical shape of phospholipids. And this has as a consequence that due to that conical shape, more bending of the membrane is created. And this makes it easier for the membrane to form new protein channels that can be used for atom and nutrient absorption. So by creating more space, more bending of the membrane and promoting the formation of new protein channels, the permeability of the membrane and thereby the nutrient absorption is improved. So now, having explained the mode of action, the theory behind lysolecithins, it's time for some trial results that we have obtained in practice. So in this trial with broilers, we fed the broilers either a diet with saturated fat, pig lard, or with unsaturated fat, soybean oil, and then we added Lysolecithins at 500 grams per ton on top. If we look at the results, you can see that with both fat sources, the growth performance in terms of end weight and average daily weight gain were improved, but also the FCR was improved. The only difference is that the effect on growth performance was bigger with the unsaturated fat, the soybean oil, while we saw a bigger effect on FCR with the saturated fat, the pig lard. And this is because pig lard is saturated and is harder to digest, and therefore there's more room for improvement in FCR as compared to the more easy to digest soybean oil. In terms of growth performance, because unsaturated fat and thereby soybean oil is easier to digest, you will also have a higher nutrient utilization from it, and therefore a slightly higher growth performance as compared with saturated fat that is harder to digest. In this trial with broilers, we reduced the energy and amino acid levels both by 3%, and then we added Lysolecithins and 3 other products containing either a combination of lysolecithins and the technical emulsifier, or a technical emulsifier alone at 500 grams per ton. So if we compare the 4 products to the negative control, you can see that all 4 products improved all 3 parameters. However, when we compare it to the positive control, we only saw this for the FCR, where all 4 products obtained a similar FCR as the positive control. However, only Lysolecithins was able to obtain a similar growth performance and therefore compensated for the reduction in energy and amino acids of all 4 products. So this trial indicated that not only the type of emulsifier, but also the level of lysolecithins in your product is determinant for your efficiency of your product and thereby the effect on animal performance. In this trial with weaned piglets, we added Lysolecithins at 500 grams per ton on top. And as you can see, the end weight was vastly improved, as well as the average daily weight gain. And also the FCR was roughly improved by roughly 5 points. So here again, Lysolecithins is also a potent emulsifier in weaned piglets. In this trial with sows, we applied Lysolecithins at 1 kilogram per ton on top, starting from 7 days pre-farrowing up to the point of weaning. So what we saw was that the sows lost less back fat and lost less weight, indicating that the sows were in a better body condition, which probably also led to a smoother farrowing process, which led then to less stillborn piglets. But also the milk quality was improved with higher levels of dry matter content, gross energy, and also protein levels were elevated. And these better milk quality probably also led to the improved average daily weight gain of the suckling piglets. So also here, lysolecithins show their benefits to be added to sow diets.
Thank you, Christy, for this very comprehensive presentation. Now we have a better understanding of the theory behind lysolecithins and we have seen some results from practice. We will continue with the next speaker. His name is André Meusen. You will see the picture soon on the next slide. He has a master's degree in animal production and from the University of Ghent in Belgium. He has more than 45 years experience in livestock industry and is the spiritual father of the abiotic nutrition concept. He is now independent consultant in animal nutrition and feed additives since 2008. André, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antoine, for this very nice introduction. Thank you, Framelco, for inviting me, giving this presentation about lysolecithins. And the subject, of course, is how we can maximize the energy utilization from feed ingredients, and more particularly from feed fats and oils. And also, I want to stress, after hearing the explanation of Christy, that lysolecithins is not only about emulsification. It is an absorption enhancer. So we are not going to speak only about fat and fat energy. We will also speak about protein utilization, amino acid utilization. Next slide. So first of all, one back. First of all, I would like to tell some words about fats. Fats, oils are triglycerides, meaning this is a glycerol molecule on which there are, in principle, 3 hydroxyl groups, where the fatty acids with their carboxyl groups are going to attach esterification. So 3 fatty acids on 1 glycerol molecule. However, fatty acids, as you can see, are chains of carbon with on one side, the alpha side, the carboxyl group, and on the other side, the methyl group. Next slide. Now, basically, we make a distinction between 2 groups of fatty acids. First, the saturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids have on all the carbons filled up with hydrogen atoms. Okay, we say this is a fully hydrogenated fatty acids. While unsaturated fatty acids, they have what we call a double bond. It was already explained by Christy that this gives a bending to the fatty acid chain. And we distinguish what we call the MUFA, the monounsaturated fatty acids, as you can see here on the picture, and the PUFA, the polyunsaturated fatty acids that have more than 1 double bond in the chain. Next slide. So the principal fatty acids that we find in feed materials and fats and oils are listed here. You see on the left side how they are named by mentioning the number of carbons, as for example, C18 means this is a fatty acid with 18 carbons. And then it is followed by a 0, which means there are 0 double bonds, meaning that fatty acid is fully saturated. Or followed by 1, 2, or 3, which means there are 1 or 2 or 3 double bonds. So that is a mono unsaturated or polyunsaturated fatty acids. Also, you can see there that the more the fatty acid is saturated, the higher is the melting point. And the higher the melting point, consequently also will have a negative influence on fat digestibility. Stearic acid, for example, as you see there, has a melting point which is 70 degrees centigrade, with the fatty acid digestibility which is below 40%. Next slide. Origin of oils and fat, vegetable oils, animal fats. The vegetable oils Well, the most known are soya oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil. These are the unsaturated oils. They are fluid, they are liquid. They have a good digestibility and consequently also have a good metabolizable energy value, which goes up to even 9,000 kilocalorie per kilogram. There are some vegetable oils which are more saturated, such as palm oil or palm kernel oil, also coconut oil. These are vegetable oils, but highly saturated, have also a higher melting point, and their digestibility usually is much lower than the other vegetable oils. Animal fats, on the contrary, you have poultry fat, rather unsaturated, good digestibility, liquid, and you have the lard and the tallow, pig lard, beef tallow, mutton tallow, which are very much saturated. They are solid, have a lower digestibility, and consequently also a lower metabolizable energy value. Next slide. Now, point one in our approach of using lysolecithins. And what is the consequence or the effect of lysolecithins on performance depending on feed quality? One of the parameters that are important is the ratio between unsaturated and saturated fatty acids. This is very important in order to know what we can expect from lysolecithins added to a feed with more saturated or more unsaturated fats. And this unsaturated to saturated ratio is determined practically by the sum of, let's say, the unsaturated, the palmitoleic, oleic, linoleic, linolenic acid, divided by the sum of the saturated, which are then principally the palmitic and the stearic acid. Next slide. I give you here a table with some examples of fats and their fatty acid profile. You see there the soya oil, the sunflower oil. These are very unsaturated, polyunsaturated fats, and they have an unsaturated to saturated ratio, which is quite high, which goes even higher than 5. We consider, we will show that later, that as soon as the US ratio is more than 3, then we have a different approach. So these are okay. Linseed also very highly unsaturated. In linseed, you can say there is another characteristic, which is the linolenic acid, which in fact is a precursor of the omega-3 fatty acids. Then you have rapeseed, also very much unsaturated, a high US ratio. The problem with rapeseed oil is that it lacks one of the very essential fatty acid, the linoleic acid, the C18-2. So we have to consider that in our feed formulations, that if we only use rapeseed oil as the principal energy source, that we may lack probably some of that linoleic acid. Further on, you have palm kernel oil, also coconut oil is the same, very much saturated. You see that the US ratio is even lower than 1, 0.23. However, here we can say with the palm kernel oil or coconut oil that their digestibility is still very good, because in this example, the US ratio is calculated on all the saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. And you see there a level of saturated fatty acids termed as medium chain fatty acids. The C6, C8, C10, C12 are medium chain fatty acids, fully saturated, but still highly digestible because they can be absorbed even without being hydrolyzed by lipase. Further to the right, you see the animal fats. Next slide. So the animal fats, butter fat, fish oil, beef tallow, poultry fat. Well, here you see indeed that all of them have a US ratio below 2. Again, this is very important to know. At the end, you have to look to the total balance of fatty acids that you will find in a complete feed. In the next slide, I will give you an example of, one more important is on the tallow. Tallow has indeed the saturated fatty acids, palmitic and stearic, with a very high level of also stearic acid. And here I give you the example of a fatty acid profile of an ordinary feed formula. A feed formula in which you can have soya oil, or you can have also beef fat. Soya oil, very much unsaturated, beef fat, very much saturated. You will see for the starter, grower and finisher, the formulas containing only soya oil, they have an unsaturated to saturated ratio, which is far higher than 3, going up to 5, even going up to 6. While all the formulas that have an important part of beef fat would be the same if it is big lard, they have all an US ratio around 2 or at least less than 3. And that has been also the basis of our new approach, just to see what will be the effect of lysolecithins and what will be the nutrient sparing effect if we use lysolecithins on diets with more unsaturated, let's say US ratio more than 3, or diets with more saturated fatty acids, US ratios less than 3. Next slide. A second point, when we think about what can be the nutrient sparing effect here in terms of energy sparing effect, is to look at how much fat is added, is included in the feed. Especially if you have more saturated fats, tallow or pig lard, then it is evident that the more of that fat you add to the feed, the lower will be the contribution of that fat to energy. We call that the multi-level fat system. If you add only 1% of animal fat together with some unsaturated oils, you have a very high energy value because there is a kind of energy with unsaturated and saturated fatty acids. But if you add more of that fat, 2, 3, and more than 3%, you see that the last percentage that you add of that saturated fat is giving much less energy to the feed. Next slide. So we have to consider fat level as well. The third thing that we have to consider, and again, I refer to the presentation of Christy, mentioning that lysolecithins are more than just an emulsifier. It is all about nutrient utilization and nutrient absorption. And indeed, we see from literature, we see also from our own trials that the effect of adding lysolecithins is not just on fat digestibility, but also on protein utilization, nitrogen retention. In this slide, on the left side, you can clearly see that the higher the fat or oil is unsaturated, for example, maize oil, the higher is the digestibility, also over time when chickens are growing. To the right side, you see the same oils and fats, but looking to nitrogen retention as a measure of protein utilization. And there you see clearly that the higher the unsaturation level, the higher also will be the nitrogen retention protein utilization. If you have very much saturated fats in your feed, this has a negative consequence on protein utilization, nitrogen retention. That is the third very important point when we are going to design a matrix on nutrient sparing effect. Next slide. A practical example of this is a digestibility trial that has been done by the University of Ghent some time ago, where you see the effect of lysolecithins on fat digestibility, on metabolizable energy, and finally you also see there very clearly the effect on nitrogen retention. And now we can calculate, but this is just theoretical. We can calculate how much that would represent in energy. The energy that we can gain by adding lysolecithins on such a diet, by improving fat digestibility. You can calculate, theoretically, how much of nitrogen retention, how much it presents in protein retention, how much in protein per ton of feed you can save by adding the lysolecithins. I stress here that this is just theoretical. Next slide. Because finally, if we are going to design a nutrient matrix based on nutrient sparing effects by adding lysolecithins, we don't do that by digestibility trials. Digestibility trials gives you an indication on the mode of action, but we do that on well-designed performance trials. And the principle here is, if you do the performance trials, you look to feed conversion ratio. And we know animals, they eat feed in the first place to satisfy their needs for energy. So any change in feed conversion ratio by adding lysolecithins is a sign that there is a change in metabolizable energy. At the same time, if you can see that there is an increase in growth, meaning that there is more proteins, amino acids utilized. So these are very important two parameters in performance trials that we use in order to design a matrix, nutritional matrix for lysolecithins. Next slide. Designing a nutritional matrix. Well, first, you have to determine what will be your application. In this example, we take an application of a lysolecithin product, Fralesimax, at 0.5 kilogram per ton. And we look to the effect coming from the performance trials. The colored figures, amino acids and energy, these are the nutrient saving effects of adding 0.5 kilogram of Fralesimax per ton of feed, savings of energy, metabolizable energy poultry, saving of amino acids, lysine, methionine, threonine, tryptophan. So that is the effect of adding 0.5 kilogram of this product, Fralesimax, per ton of feed. Now, if you design the matrix, next slide, then you have to give that figures as a value per 1 kilogram of Fralesimax. As you do that also for any feed ingredients, you give a nutritional value gram per kilogram. Some they also do it in percentage. It's also possible. And then you see here, for example, for energy, that you have a certain energy level, kilocalorie per kilogram Lesimax. And then you have to think, okay, if I apply 0.5 kilogram, then the The consequence will be, as you can see on the right side, I will save that much of kilocalorie per ton of feed. And the same is for the amino acids, because we are sure about what the product is doing. It is not just having effect on feed conversion, we always see an effect on growth, so protein utilization. The last thing I want to say here is all the figures that you see there in color are the effect, the nutrient sparing effect of adding lysolecithins. The other figures in black are just analytical figures. Indeed, lecithins contain some fat. Indeed, lysolecithins, lecithins, phospholipids contain some phosphor, contain even some choline, because of the presence of phosphatidylcholine. Next slide. After having done all these performance trials, we came up with our standard matrix for Fra-Lesimax. And that matrix of Fra-Lesimax that we have used so far and designed is still valid. Is valid for any feed that contain less than 5% total fat, crude fat, but with an unsaturated to saturated fatty acid higher than 2. We have an example where the US ratio is lower than 2, but that is really exceptional, so it's not for a common distribution. So for such a type of feed, we have designed the nutritional matrix for energy, metabolizable energy poultry, for the amino acids, as you can see on this slide. Before I show the next slide, you have to watch the values for energy, you have to watch the values for the amino acids. And you will see that the ratio will change according to the change of fat content and fat quality. Next slide. So the next matrix, the new matrix that we come up, is for feeds that contain more than 5%. If it is less than 5%, then it doesn't matter as long as the US ratio is more than 2. But if it is more than 5%, we have to look to the US ratio. And when a lot of unsaturated oils are added, US ratio more than 3, then we have this matrix designed. So more energy can be spared, and especially here you see more amino acids. And that is the difference with the next one. The next one, more fat, more than 5%, but more saturated. Unsaturated to saturated ratio less than 3. And then you see in the matrix, yes, there is an increase in energy again, but there is a further and more important increase in amino acids, because of the negative correlation between saturated fats and protein digestibility. So these are the 3 matrices that we use today, depending on the 3 characteristics: total fat content and fat quality. And finally, taking into consideration also nutrient utilization in terms of amino acids. Economically, what does that mean? Next slide. So summarizing the effect of these 3 matrices, more than 5% or less than 5% total fat, more saturated or less saturated or more unsaturated. You see here the effect on the main components: metabolizable energy, amino acids, lysine and methionine, which are the main amino acids that we add to the feed. Economically, we can now calculate, next slide, what would be the effect. For example, in the basic matrix with the fat content less than 5, US ratio more than 2, we can calculate the economical consequences. On the top left, you see what is the nutrient sparing effect by adding half a kilogram of Fra-Lesimax, in this case, per ton of feed. You see the sparing effect on energy in kilocalorie per ton. You see the sparing effect on amino acids, lysine, methionine. There is some saving of phosphor or choline, because that is what lecithins contain. And then on the top right, you see which are the normal feed ingredients that can be saved if you have these sparing effects. For example, you have a sparing effect on energy, and then you can save some soya oil. Of course, soya oil, if you take it out, you have to replace it by something else. In this example, we replace soya oil by maize, and we have then a net saving of 5,000 and somewhat kilocalorie per kilogram of soya oil that we replace by maize. The amino acids, in this example, we do just replace them by synthetic amino acids, L-lysine hydrochloric or DL-methionine. And then on the bottom of the slide of the table, you can see the calculation. Having a market price, hopefully it is representative for your situation. For every different ingredient, we calculate how much soya oil you can replace if you save that level of metabolizable energy, which is mentioned on the top left table. And we can save indeed 8.28 kilogram of soya oil, replacing by corn, by maize. We can save some synthetic DL-methionine, some L-lysine, and some monocalcium phosphate, some choline chloride. Of course, all that has to be replaced by something else. In this case, we replace it by 8.18 kilogram of corn, maize. Of course, we have to add also fralesimax, half a kilogram per ton. And then on the right bottom, you see how much in total now you can save on your feed formula, $7.43 per ton of feed, just by adding fralesimax, half kilogram per ton, and saving on these feed ingredients. What is your net saving? It will depend on the cost of the fralesimax. But I'm sure that you still have a good net saving if you incorporate also the cost of fralesimax in that example. Second example is when fat content is more than 5%, US ratio more than 3, very unsaturated. Again, we have designed the new matrix. You see the sparing effect on the top left. Again, all the feed ingredients that you can replace to some extent. And then below, you see the calculation just to focus on soya oil. For example, you see minus 10.74 kilogram of soya oil, which can be replaced by corn, by maize, because of energy sparing effect. But you see also the amino acid sparing effect. And in total, you have here a sparing effect already of $9.5 per ton of feed. And then the last example, the third matrix that we have designed, when you have more than 5% crude fat in the diet, but quite a lot of saturated fat, animal fat, pig lard, beef tallow, mutton tallow. And then you see in the table, what is the sparing effect per ton of feed and how much you can save. And now you can save, of course, you will spare more tallow because this is a diet based on more tallow than soya oil. And you can spare up to 17.5 kilogram of tallow in your per ton of feed in your feed formula. Finally, you can have a gross saving of more than $13 per ton of feed, not calculated yet the cost of including half a kilogram of fralesimax. So I would like to conclude with this take-home message. We have a solution with the lysolecithins to cope with the present situation of increasing prices of oils, and fat, we have to remember that lysolecithins have an effect on not only energy sparing, but also protein or amino acid sparing effect. The effect will depend on mainly two factors: fat content of the feed and fat quality. Fat quality in terms of saturated, unsaturated. And finally, the higher fat content in your feed and the more it is saturated, the more there are difficulties also, the more effect you can expect by adding lysolecithins, and the more will be the economical benefit. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, André. Meanwhile, we see already a lot of questions in the chat box. Don't worry, we will answer the question. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the speaker presentation. Having seen these different matrices for different fat level, we now have a better understanding of the economical benefits of lysolecithin. To further support these benefits, we will now continue with someone who has been successfully implementing lysolecithin in a daily practice.
Okay, thank you, Anton, for the introduction. Good morning.
I would like to introduce you, Dr. Silva. Dr. Silva, you are Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from Malaysian Agriculture University for more than 30 years of experience in livestock industry, and you are now partner with Framelco for more than 10 years, and you will today share our experience. The floor is yours, doctors.
Okay, thank you, Anton, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone here. So today, the topic of my presentation is to share the Malaysian experience of using Fra Lesimax in broiler feeds. So first, a brief introduction of our company. We are a Malaysian company that is based in the state of Selangor, in the town of Meru. Our company was established about 51 years ago, and we are currently a pharmaceutical-based company. So we actually import, we manufacture, we sell, we market and distribute pharmaceutical products for humans and for veterinary. So our animal health and nutrition business, which I'm part of, was started about 30 over years ago. And we actually do coverage the entire livestock sector in this country, from feed mills, integrators, poultry farm, pig farms, aquaculture, vet clinics, and pet shops. Okay, next slide. Okay, so some basic stats about our country, Malaysia. So the country has a land mass of about 333,000 square kilometers. The latest population is somewhere about 33 million. Coming to total feed production, so last year, the figure was slightly above 5 million tons of feed per year, compounded feed. So of which broilers make up about 2.3 million tons. Commercial layer makes up about 1.6 million tons. Swine is about 800,000 tons per year, and others feeds, that's like aquaculture, ruminant, some pet foods, that is about 400,000 tons a year. So you can see that on average it's about more than about 3/4 is poultry feeds. Okay, next slide. Okay, so just like every country in the world now, I think the critical challenge that farmers are facing here is basically related to the high cost of feeds and over dependence of imported ingredients. So for Malaysia, we actually import all our corn, wheat, soybean, and oilseed meals. It's 100% imports. So that comprises about 85% of our ingredient needs. 15% of the ingredients are able to source locally. So that will be products like rice bran, palm oil, palm kernel meal, and some fish meal. So we have another challenge is that the high feed price is really killing, but our selling price of broilers and eggs is actually relatively low compared with other countries. So of course, the issue is very deep. It has social, economic aspect, but the last 2 years, the drastic drop in consumer purchasing power is very noticeably felt due to the global recession. And in response, the government have actually intervened to cap selling prices of broilers and eggs. So that means selling price of broilers and eggs cannot go a certain price limit set by the government, irrespective of production cost. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here is where Lysolecithins comes in. So 5 years ago, when Framelco discussed with us whether is there a market for Lysolecithins in Malaysia, so we did a review and we used 7 key considerations to see whether the product should be able to sell here or not. So I think the first will be the product must have a consistent and reproducible field results. That means if Lysolecithins is used, batch after batch of animals reared must show the same degree of improvement. Okay. The second consideration is that the flexibility in usage. So earlier, Christy have shown that the product can be used for not only poultry, broiler layers, swine, even we are using here for aquaculture. So we have diversity in the types of diet being used this product. And also the dosage range, nutritionists can actually play around with how much Lysolecithins added per ton of feed to get what they desire in their objective. Okay, the third consideration is the synergism with other nutrients and feed additive. So if you're looking at Lysolecithins, the earlier speakers have already shown that there is a favorable interaction of Lysolecithins not only with fat but also with protein, amino acids, and so that actually gives value to the formulations. Fourth consideration is that the product must not have any negative interaction with other nutrients and feed additive. So far we don't find such interactions with Lysolecithins, but this thing actually have been known to occur with some feed additive. So for example, a common one is copper sulfate. So you can put copper sulfate, maybe 300, 400 grams per ton, you get good growth results, but some, if you're too eager, you go up 1-2 kilos. So the feed intake and the growth rate all will be depressed. Okay, so fifth consideration is that the product must be user-friendly to humans, the animals that is taking it, the equipment and environment. So far we find that Lysolecithins is friendly to humans, no issue of workers facing pungent smell or corrosion problem. It's not toxic to animals. It doesn't corrode equipment, and it's a safe ingredient because basically it's coming from soya lecithin, so it's basically a GRAS product. Okay, the sixth consideration is that the product must have excellent product stability during storage and after feed processing. So we have customers who are using Lysolecithins in pelleted feed. We have some using even in extruded feeds. So far, no issue on the product efficacy and stability. And then the final one.
Mr. Sivaram, Dr. Sivaram. It looks like we face a little problem about the connection of Dr. Sivaram. I think we will get back in a few seconds. I hope the connection will be okay in few seconds, Dr. Sivaram. Otherwise, I will ask Christy to be ready to start maybe the next part if Dr. Sivaram cannot join us back in a short moment. Christy, Are you near? So Christy will now present the last part. And we are worried for Mr. Sivaram. So about the conclusion, first you may wonder where you can buy Lysolecithins. You can see on the Dr. Sivaram is back.
I'm sorry, I got cut off.
Cut off. Well, it happens
Okay.
sometimes. We will go back the slide. Few slides, and Christy still wait for few minutes.
Okay, next one.
Thank you.
Okay, this I done. So next slide. Okay, so how do we use Lysolecithins in Malaysia? So here we are just talking about the broiler and commercial layer. We use it for two purposes. One is a digestive enhancer, and another one is to reduce palm oil inclusion. So there's two dose regimes that we are recommending for our customers. So it's the main one, most are using 500 grams Lysolecithins per ton of feed. So this can be used as a top-on application. That means you don't change the formulation, or you can apply the metrics which Andre has spoken earlier. And there are some customers, a minority, that are just using about 250 grams of Lysolecithins per ton, purely as on-top application. So if you want to use the metrics, you must use the 500 grams per ton dosage. Okay, and you should be able to see, irrespective of both dose regime, you should be able to see improvement in growth rate and FCR for broilers, and layers report increase in egg weight. Okay, next slide. So this is a trial that we did about 4 years ago with one of our customers. So the customer profile is that they are an independent commercial feed mill, and they are producing poultry feed for open market. So that means they are selling their broiler feed to farmers, private farmers who rear their own chickens. They source their own day old chicks, they source their own feeds, and they do the marketing of their own broilers. So this is a very tough segment for broiler farms to be in this, because they would have to be very, very good farmers, very, very good technical performance, because they are basically competing against the integrators who have their own feed mills and breeder farms. So customers' objective is to try to see whether they can improve their feed performance versus competitor feeds with the minimum cost. Okay, they want their feed to be better, but at the lowest cost increase possible. So our suggestion was that we would propose that they add Lysolecithins at the full dose of 500 grams per ton of feed from day one until the chickens are harvested. No changes in the formulation. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so this is the results that we able to get about 2 months after the trial started, and the birds have already been sold. So the economical calculation is based on the improvement in FCR. This is the figure the customer gave us. Okay, so after using Lysolecithins, the FCR actually improved from the normal 1.55 to 1.47. So there's an improvement of about 8 percentage points. Okay, and the figure, if we want to calculate now in economic sense, what does it translate to? So I will just use 1,000 kilograms of feed and convert that into the live weight yield. That means the meat of the broilers at catching. So for FCR of 1.55, 1,000 divided by 1.55 will give you 645.16 kilogram of live broiler weight. Okay, if 1.47 FCR, the figure is increased now to 680.27 kilograms. So with Lysolecithins, the farm actually is harvesting broilers with a heavier weight. Okay, the difference in live yield, if you deduct the Lysolecithins and the negative control, is 35.11 kilogram. So 4 years ago, the broiler price then was 480. ringgit 480 per kilogram. This is what the chicken catchers will pay the farmer, my customer, per kilogram of live weight harvested. So 35.11 kilo times 480, that means my customer actually earned 168 ringgit 53 cents, okay, in meat yields. So the return in investment based on the 1 ton of feed treated with Lysimax, okay, earlier there were some people asked what's the price of Lysimax. So 4 years ago, the price was 26 ringgit per kilogram of product. So if you add half a kilo, it's 13 ringgit per ton of feed. So to calculate the return on investment, so the meat, the proceeds, the revenue from the meat sales, 168.53 divided by the cost of adding Lysimax, 13 ringgit. So we get the ROI of positive 12.96. So that shows that in conclusion, Lysimax not only improve the daily life yield, feed conversion, it also improved the farm profitability. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sivaram. It brings us to the last part of our presentation, the conclusion. You may wonder where you can buy Lysolecithins, and it is available in Fra Lysimax product from Fra Melco, available in 37 countries worldwide. Christy will close the presentation with a summary of average result of Fra Lysimax on animal health and performance.
So during this webinar, we have talked a lot about broilers. So I will just quickly summarize some of the average results we have found with our swine trials. So first of all, the weaned piglets, we see a vast improvement in growth performance, nice return on investment, but also we see improvements on the FCR. And because these weaned piglets are heavier at the end of the weaning period, they will also start their grower fattening period at a higher weight. And this gives us the possibility to shorten the fattening period, as these weaned piglets will then also reach their final weight a little faster. So for sows, we see that sows are in a better body condition. Also, the return on investment is nice, less stillborn piglets, but also the sow fertility is improved due to the sows being in a better body condition, with the number of open days being reduced by almost 10%. So also in swine, Lysimax has been proven to be a potent emulsifier. So thank you all for your attention, and I think it's time for your questions.
Thank you, Christy. I will ask all the speakers to come back around this virtual table to answer the numerous questions of the audience. Christy, as you are still here, we got a question about the CMC. Is a lower CMC value, critical micelle concentration, indicates a more efficient product or a lesser dosage requirement?
So with a lower CMC, you will also need to less of the product. So indeed, with products with a lower CMC like Lysolecithins as compared to native lecithin and technical emulsifiers, you need to add less to obtain this, the same emulsion as with products with higher CMCs. So yes, there is a slight improvement in efficiency use then, yeah.
Okay. Talking about that, another question comes about, is there any other kind of feed additive that can have a synergy or an impact on the Lysolecithins
Yes.
efficacy?
Yeah, so Lysolecithins are good to combine with enzymes, as Lysolecithins will give these enzymes better access to their substrates, and there's this kind of synergy between the two. But also in combination with monoglycerides is also good, as the monoglycerides will have, of course, the antibacterial effect, and then the Lysolecithins will improve further performance. Yeah.
Okay. A last question for you, Christy. Could you highlight what is the difference between a technical emulsifier and Lysolecithins? Is it different or similar?
Yeah, technical emulsifiers are more hydrophilic, and they have such a high hydrophilicity that they are perfect for feed processing, but less optimal for in vivo fat digestion. Also, technical emulsifiers are larger, larger molecules, and therefore you will have bigger emulsified fat droplets, bigger mixed micelles, which results in a less finely dispersed emulsion, a lower enzymatic potential as the surface area on which lipase can act is smaller, and also you will have a lower transport efficiency because the mixed micelles are smaller, are bigger. But also technical emulsifiers do not have an effect on the permeability of the membrane, whereas lysolecithins do.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Andre, we have some question about the matrix and basically the reformulation that we can do. Should we change the level of fat in a diet by using Lysimax? How we can think about use of lysolecithin to the raw material used in the feed?
So changing the fat.
Changing the fat level. Can we replace some oil by Lysimax? Or
well, yes, of course. I have shown in the examples how much fat or oil that we can replace using the matrix of Lysimax. And if I remember well, with the lower fat levels in feed, it is about 8 kilograms of oil that can be replaced. You have to replace it by something. So in this example, I replaced it by corn. Or if you have extreme high levels of fat and these fats are highly saturated, then of course you can replace, the effect is much more, and you can replace, if I remember from that calculation, something like 17.5 kilogram of tallow or pig lard per ton of feed, replacing by, for example, corn.
okay.
I still wanted to say add something. Always keep at least half up to 1% of added fat in the diet. And the reason for that is two. First of all, to make it less dusty. Secondly, if you want to granulate the feed, so to improve the pelleting process and pellet quality.
Okay, thank you. Another question about the matrix. Could we change the dosage of Lysimax according to the US ratio?
Well, we recommend, of course, half a kilogram per ton when it is about pigs or poultry. Of course, you can also use 250 grams per ton. And that is a question that we get very often from areas where diets are formulated with rather low fat content. However, it is an economical decision that you have to make, because all our dose response trials have shown that there is a linear effect by increasing the dosage of 250 gram up to half a kilogram. This is a linear effect. Of course, if you go above more than 500 grams per ton, 750 or 1 kilogram, then the effect will be lower. So then it is the law of diminishing return. So it is just an economical decision. How much you want to invest? Just by adding 250 grams, you will see a nice effect. If you add double, you will see double the effect. Above the 500 gram, the effect will not be doubled, but then it is a diminishing return.
Okay, thank you, Andre. I would like to ask one question to Dr. Silva. Could you share or remind the use of Lysimax? Do you have any experience in layer, and at what level?
Yeah, most of our customers are layer farms. So most of them are adding Lysimax at the full dose of 500 grams per ton. The main purpose is that they want to increase the egg weight, the egg mass. Okay, it is possible that by doing so, we are looking we are looking at somewhere an increase of somewhere about 1 to 2 grams in the average egg weight of the farm after Lysimex is used in the feed. Okay, so there are some layer farms that, because now palm oil price is very high, so some of these customers have actually started to use the matrix when using Lysimex at 500 grams. So most of them will reduce palm oil inclusion by somewhere from 5 kilos to 10 kilos per ton of feed. Okay, these are hard times, so they want to reduce costs more than the egg weights. Okay, that's my experience.
Yeah, thank you. And do you use it? Is it mostly at the beginning of the laying cycle, or at the end, or whatever?
We recommend farmers to, layer farmers to use it from day one. Okay, because it's a different effect of Lysimex for pullets and also for layers. In layers, it's very plain. You get heavier eggs, better feed conversion, possible reduction in palm oil. But for pullets, our observation is that pullets that are fed Lysimex from day one right until 10 weeks, we notice the body frame is better developed. The pullets are more uniform whenever we weigh the birds at, let's say, at 5 weeks or 10 weeks. So for layer farming, pullet uniformity is a very good indicator of future laying performance. So the only time we don't use Lysimex in the pullets stage is from the 10th week to right until just before point of lay. That's about 15, 16 weeks. Because from my experience is that we don't want to give the pullets too much energy after the 10 to 15, 16 weeks, because that sometimes make them become overweight and obese. So that's the only period we take off Lysimex. For the whole pullet cycle, from 1 day old up to 10 weeks, we are recommending the full dose of 500 grams. Preferably, the matrix is not applied. For the reason is we don't want to deprive the pullet of any nutrients that they might need during this critical phase. We are going for organ growth, frame development. We want to give them all the nutrients they need.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Silva, for this interesting comment. Yes, André, for sure.
Yeah, I would like to add something on that question, and thanks for the answers given so far. 2 remarks. Yes, adding lysolecithins on a layer diet has a positive effect on egg weight, egg mass, especially egg weight. And the first reason for that is the better absorption of the linoleic acid. Linoleic acid is very essential and is also a parameter that enhances egg weight, together with better amino acid utilization. Second thing I want to add there also is that usually we see an effect also on egg yolk color, because simply the carotenoids that are present in feed, especially coming from raw materials such as corn or added carotenoids, are also fat soluble and will be better absorbed. And that is for table eggs. But even more interesting is when you talk about breeders, laying breeders, very expensive eggs. Breeder companies, they always want to have as quick as possible breeding eggs with a weight of more than 42 grams in order to be good hatching eggs. So adding lysolecithins in the early phase of production with breeding hens is very interesting, because you can obtain sooner the larger eggs good enough to be hatched. And there also the carotenoids play a very interesting role, because carotenoids also work as antioxidants. And I must say, anecdotally, we don't have really the figures, but anecdotally we have noticed that breeding hens fed lysolecithins, they have more carotenoids in the hatching eggs and produce more resistant day-old chicks, because more healthy. Then the second remark I want to make about this using palm oil in layer diets. I would not recommend increasing the levels of palm oil in layer diets, maximum 2%, but if you can lower it by adding lysolecithins to 1%, it would be better. The reason is palm oil in laying diets is not a good idea because it is saturated, similar to tallow and pig lard, with the big difference that the fatty acids, the saturated, the palmitic and the stearic fatty acid on palm oil is located on the alpha places, on the extreme. And if it is digested, hydrolyzed by lipase, then this palmitic and stearic acid is becoming free and will react with the calcium, which is plenty in layer diets. And this will form insoluble calcium palmitate or calcium stearate. So not good for the energy, not good for the calcium absorption. So avoid to use too much of palm oil in layer or breeder diets. Pig lard, beef fat, that is not a problem because there the stearic acid is located on the beta place. So it's not hydrolyzed. When the fat is hydrolyzed by lipase, then fatty acids will be released from the extreme part of the triglycerides, but the stearic and palmitic, which is on the beta place, will remain as a monoglyceride and does not react with any calcium in the feed.
Thank you, Andre, for this comprehensive explanation. Christy, I would like to ask you a last bunch of questions. We got questions about the broiler trial that you presented, and the audience would like knowing more about the protocol, the method, and what we reduced in the diet.
Yeah. Okay, so the positive control, so the unreformulated diet consisted of soybean meal with some corn and full-fat soybeans as the fat source. So the crude fat content of that positive control ranged between 7.6 and 8.6%, and then we reduced it to 5.9 to 6.8% for the negative control when we reformulated it. We just reduced the amino acids also by 3% and the overall energy content also by 3%.
All the amino acids?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and
yeah, and so then we added Lysolecithins at the optimal broiler dosage of 500 grams per ton.
And specifically, yes, you mentioned the dose. Could you remind me and to the audience the different doses that we can apply Lysolecithins according to the species, stages, or any other recommendation to have the best usage of Lysolecithins?
Yeah, so for broilers and poultry in general, we have an optimal dosage of 500 grams per ton. For weaned piglets, this is also 500 grams per ton, and for the sows, we recommend a dosage of 1 kilogram per ton. And these dosages were established via dose response trials. So therefore, these are our optimal dosages.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Thank you. I would like to thank all the speakers for your presentation today. I would like to say to the audience that all the questions, I repeat, all the questions will be answered in the coming days. You will receive it on your mailbox. And I will now close this webinar. And thank you all for your attention and presence today. Have a wonderful evening.